So the thing that I was saying was the fact that Sana Shamim is not a person who can claim anything about me or anyone about around me, mainly due to the fact that she doesn't have any sources of info. The other thing is, if someone is giving opinions and they're not someone who's saying that they witnessed me commit a crime, then that opinion has to be based on something that they themselves saw or they themselves heard about from a source in the family in any way, shape, or form possible. You can't just have an opinion, an epiphany like that coming out of nowhere. If I'm giving an opinion about my neighbor whom I've never met, no one has ever said anything about that person to me, and law enforcement would just come over to my house one day and say that we don't have any narrators in our trial, and all we, law enforcement, did was go around committing sex schemes and money fraud with everyone around that person who is your neighbor, due to which we cannot narrate in the trial against him, since every single person that we would point at saying that this person said something even remotely considered bad against your neighbor when that neighbor was a child, that person would have been someone that we're committing money fraud with or sex schemes with right now as we speak, since the year 2001 or since the past 25 years, due to which we, law enforcement, cannot say anything bad against your neighbor. And every narrator we have had have all tried to get your neighbor to either marry their daughter, do the greed, or commit incest with their in-laws and people in their in-laws, like how my dad, the greedy framer, is doing today, or marry their sister, like Ibrahim, the greedy framer. And all these narrators have all been caught fabricating false testimonies against your neighbor, with the person like Junaid even being caught saying that he wants to murder me because I'm not helping him with the sex game, due to extreme envy of and sex rage and sex addiction of these girls that are coming after your neighbor, not liking Junaid. If law enforcement came over to me one day and said these things to me and then said that we need you to say this and this about your neighbor, would it be okay for me to say that about my neighbor? No, obviously not. I've never met that neighbor of mine. There's no person who could have said these things about my neighbor to me, due to which I'm saying these things about my neighbor ever, just because every single narrator in the trial have been caught fabricating and begging my neighbor for money as soon as his brain savant gets freed, or asking him to go scam someone's daughter and the neighbor is not willing to do so. And just because law enforcement themselves cannot narrate in the trial, they want me to go and say these things about my neighbor, despite me never meeting that neighbor, despite no one ever saying anything bad to me about that neighbor. Does it make sense for me to go and narrate in the trial against my neighbor? No, absolutely not. You have to look at the reason for why they want me to narrate in this trial against my neighbor, mainly due to the fact that every single narrator that law enforcement has had against my late neighbor have all been caught blackmailing my neighbor for millions of euros as soon as his brain savant gets freed, forcing him to marry their daughter, like Farah, more than 80 times in the last in the last few weeks alone, more than 80 times, with the last one coming just yesterday, or maybe even today, this morning on August 13th. But more than 80 times in the last few weeks. And other people like Ibrahim asking me to marry his sister after fabricating numerous lies against me, even the one, some false testimonies last month in the month of July 2026. And then you have other narrators like Junaid caught conspiring to murder my neighbor only due to the fact that he's not willing to go scam someone's daughter for Junaid and then pass her around to Junaid, which is a wrong thing to do. That neighbor might have some problems in his life. He might have a girl. He might have some problems in his life due to which he can't even think about doing something like scamming someone's daughter. People have problems in life, okay? Yeah, just because law enforcement, all of their narrators have been caught with blackmailing my neighbor with millions of dollars or euros, asking him to commit incest with people in his family, his in-laws, like my dad, the greedy framer, in exchange for millions of euros, after fabricating numerous lies against my neighbor, being caught, every single lie being caught, just because Ibrahim, the greedy framer, wanted my neighbor to marry Ibrahim's sister due to agreed for money, due to my neighbor having literally the world's most rare brain savant, most profitable brain savant, marked by artificial intelligence as being literally the most profitable brain savant in the world. And Ibrahim wants my neighbor to marry Ibrahim's sister, which he's not willing to do because he's already got someone. He has someone he's made promises and vows to. Just because my neighbor is not willing to scam someone else's daughter and being passed around to people like Junaid, the sex-addicted freak who was even conspiring to murder my neighbor just 2 days ago after Junaid asked him to help him with the sex game, and he refused. Like, no, I have someone. I wouldn't do that. I'm not like that. I wouldn't want that done to my daughter. I'm not going to do it to someone else's, knowing that I'm not marrying them, and they know that they're not benefiting from me in the least if I did sleep with them at all. Yeah. So this neighbor of mine, that law enforcement, and then when I asked law enforcement, why don't you narrate in the trial, since I've never met my neighbor, I've never heard anyone say anything bad about my neighbor, so why don't you, law enforcement, narrate in this trial? And law enforcement tells me, well, it's because the only thing that we have now, after fabricating numerous false testimonies against your neighbor, is that we're going to say that someone around your neighbor as a child said something even remotely considered bad around that neighbor, even though it's not a crime. We're going to try to exaggerate as much as possible, but we cannot do that since we are law enforcement, and all we've done since 2001 is run sex schemes with those people that we're claiming could have said even remotely anything bad around that neighbor of yours as a child, and we're going to try to exaggerate as much as possible. That's no excuse for trying to use me when I'm saying that I have never met that neighbor, and I have never had any valid sources tell me anything even legitimate in the least bit amount considered legitimate and valid for me to be saying about my neighbor in court of law. I have no right. Do I have any right to say anything bad about my neighbor? No, absolutely not. I've never met that neighbor. I've never had any sources, so I've never met that neighbor to be able to analyze him and say that he's a bad person. The other thing is, I've never had any sources of people telling me that this neighbor of yours is a bad person because XYZ reason, and that source would be a valid source with a valid, legitimate reason for them to be saying these things to me about my neighbor. I have no reason to be saying anything bad about my neighbor, especially considering the fact that the only reason law enforcement wants me to say anything bad about my neighbor, like how they want Sana Shamim to say about me, is due to the fact that every single narrator that law enforcement has had in this trial so far have all been caught trying to get me to give them illegal assurances of money in one way or another, trying to get me to commit incest with their family in-laws and like my dad, the greedy framer, or even his own sister to get that illegal assurance of money when my brain savant would get freed, or to marry their sister like how Ibrahim, the greedy framer, wants me to do, or yeah. Who else is there? Yeah. And or to help scam other people's daughters, like how Junaid wants me to do. And so, and Junaid even said on the night of August the 11th that he wants to murder me due to me not helping him scam other people's daughters, which I won't do because it's wrong. I won't marry her, so I'm not going to go scam her either. It's plain and simple. Yeah, so this is no reason. And then when I asked law enforcement, why don't you just go narrate? Law enforcement says, well, the reason we don't narrate against your neighbor is due to the fact that we, law enforcement, have been running sex schemes with the people that could have even remotely have said anything bad around your neighbor as a child, that we want to exaggerate as much as possible, only because all our false testimonies, even getting a 10-year-old child to claim it 25 years later that they heard your neighbor say anti-government things to him when your neighbor was a 10-year-old child, or even getting a group chat false testimony taken out of his pharmacy school only to try to frame him despite the group chat that not even being in the same time period that he was in pharmacy school. We're out of all our false testimonies. We all our narrators have been caught greedily trying to get him to commit incest with their own sister, like my dad, the greedy framer, or his in-laws that my dad, the greedy framer, is trying today to get illegal assurance of money in exchange for me committing incest, since that's the only option left for him, since he can't enviously lock it up, or Ibrahim, the greedy framer, trying to force me to marry his sister, who is way too young and ugly for me to ever consider. And further, the greedy framer sending me at least 80 of these requests to marry her abnormal looking ugly daughters, to which I have said, I'm not interested in your abnormal looking ugly daughters. Please stop. In the past few weeks, she sent it to me at least 80 times. So basically, yeah, all these people, the past narrators that law enforcement told me about my neighbor have all been caught to have been fabricating lies. Not only that, blackmailing my neighbor with illegal assurances of millions of dollars when his brain savant would get freed, or trying to force my neighbor to marry their daughter, or their sister, like Ibrahim, the greedy framer, or commit incest with their sister, like my dad, the greedy framer, or even commit incest with their in-laws in exchange for illegal assurances of money, like how my dad, the greedy framer, was doing just this morning, today, again, even though it's been labeled as such. And this is after he's been trying to get me to agree to committing incest with my dad, the greedy framer's sisters in exchange for illegal assurance of money after my brain savant would get freed. Law enforcement tells me that the past narrators that they had not only fabricated numerous lies about my neighbor over and over again, but that they've been doing these things to try to get my neighbor's brain savant money, since my neighbor's brain savant has been marked by artificial intelligence as being literally the most profitable brain savant in the world right now. And then law enforcement tell me that they cannot narrate in the trial themselves, since the people that they want to exaggerate and fabricate around my neighbor, when the neighbor of mine was a child, these people have been BFFs with law enforcement since the year 2001, running sex scenes with Uncle Joey's in-laws since 2001, due to which they had to provide reciprocal sex scenes for Uncle Joey for decades, and money fraud with other individuals. Law enforcement tells me that I should narrate these things about my neighbor. You think it's right for me to do so? No, I've never met that neighbor. I don't have any credible sources of info telling me that these things that law enforcement want me to say should go from me. The only reason it should go from me is if I had someone else come and tell me these things about my neighbor. That person would come and tell me, even from the neighborhood, come and tell me that they have seen my neighbor commit this crime or that crime, or know about my neighbor committing such a crime or such thing of that sort of nature. But that's not even true. Then should I go narrate? No. Just because law enforcement cannot narrate in this trial due to running sex scenes with Uncle Joey's in-laws since 2001, due to which they have to provide reciprocal sex scenes for Uncle Joey, or law enforcement cannot narrate due to money fraud that have been stubbornly running for years and years, does not mean that they could just go pick a random person like Sana Shamim and then tell her what to say that law enforcement wanted to say themselves, but could not say due to them doing nothing but sex schemes and money fraud with everyone. It does not make any sense for Sana Shamim to be saying it, especially considering the fact that law enforcement has only lied till now with their own narration, starting with the wedding crime in 2023 that they themselves confessed I had nothing to do with. They lied till now with every single thing that they said. They lied till now with a 10-year-old child claiming 25 years later, mid-January 2026. They lied till now with a group chat false testimony coming out of my pharmacy school with the person in law enforcement who gets a monthly money every month, fabricating it for them, not even in the same time I was in pharmacy school. They lied till now with all the false testimonies that they had other people make, that November 28, 2025, that law enforcement knew was about to be fabricated in early November when I was going to Russia. They lied about everything so far. They have themselves blackmailed me with price tags of illegal assurances of money with the Remitly ad only a few days ago. Yes, and so does it make, and then after all of that, and all of this lying, and all of this greedy tactics of blackmail price tags, and asking me for illegal assurances of money, and then getting all these narrators who have an obvious motive of extreme envy and greed for money, or extreme envy for sex, like Junaid has, due to which he was even 2 nights ago on August the 11th, even threatening to murder me, planning to murder me with law enforcement after I refused to help him scan these other people's daughters, which I would never do, by the way. Doesn't give these people any right, law enforcement, to be going over to random people like Sana Shamim, who's had no source of info, she could point to, even in the closed room, saying that this person basically gave me this info about Hassan, that Hassan is a bad person in this way, shape, or form possible. No, there is no source of info that Sana Shamim even has about me at all. So there's no reason why there's absolutely no reason why Sana Shamim would claim all these things about me as quote-unquote opinions when she doesn't have any valid sources of info, for one. And the other thing is, the other thing also is the fact that she doesn't have any valid sources of info. The other thing is there's no record of me ever meeting her to be her having to give opinions of me, quote unquote opinions. If I'm giving a narration against a neighbor of mine in a trial in court, I have to have met that neighbor, known something bad about him or good about him. If I don't have anything bad about him, I've never even met him to have known anything bad about him, then in order to give that quote-unquote opinion, I at least need someone to come and tell me something bad about that neighbor that would be credible and from a valid source, and not with a motive of sex or money or greed or envy for sex or money. Then that source could be considered. But there's no such thing. Then basically what it is law enforcement themselves wanting to make more fabrication and exaggerations against me, all their previous narrators being caught as being complete and total liars, due to which law enforcement now wishes to find someone else to narrate in the trial for them as quote-unquote opinions, when in fact law enforcement cannot give that opinion themselves. Law enforcement cannot give that narration, despite it probably being false and obviously being a lie and fabrication in the first place, since law enforcement has already lied so many times. And if it was any way, shape, or form true, then they would have used this first before the 10-year-old child claiming mid-January 2026 that he heard me say anti-government things to him, before the November 20th false testimony that law enforcement knew was about to be fabricated before I even left for Russia, before the group chat false testimony that came out of my pharmacy school that law enforcement knew was fully fabricated. It's not even in the same time period I was in pharmacy school. So before all these false testimonies, law enforcement could have made this statement at that time about me, or anyone adult supervising me when I was a child, in any way, shape, or form, but they did not. They never did, due to the fact that it's not true. And they only thought of false things first, but due to the fact that it wasn't true in the first place. You have to remember, the first thing that Ibrahim's envious mother said before November 20th is, I have nothing against Hassan except for lies. So afterwards, common sense dictated everything was a lie, and everything was a lie. Early January was confessed lie after November 20th. Early April was a lie from the phone, facts and evidences from the phone conversations retrieved. And right now, July, the one that Ibrahim, the greedy farmer spokesperson, made, that was also a lie, complete and total lie. So every single thing was a lie. Why do we know this? Because the first thing was a lie, the second thing was a lie, and all the subsequent things were a lie. If there was anything truthful, they would have used that first, obviously. If there was anything truthful, law enforcement would have used it first. Instead of the 10-year-old child claiming in mid-January 2026 that I said anti-government things to him when I was a 10-year-old child, or instead of the group chat false testimony coming out of my overseas pharmacy school that wasn't even in the same time period I was in pharmacy school, instead of November 20th that law enforcement knew about, they would have used this lie first if there was any bit of truth to it, but they never did, which means that the things that law enforcement is trying to get Sana Shamim to claim and make, first of all, Sana Shamim is not making these. These are not her quote-unquote opinions, since this is not a witness account of Sana Shamim. She has never witnessed me commit any of these things herself, nor does he have any sources to go and tell her these things about me, due to which she's claiming these things about me. She doesn't have any sources that could say these things about me to Sana Shamim either, which means that Sana Shamim is basically Sana Shamim is basically only saying things for law enforcement. And since law enforcement has only been lying till now, you know for a fact that the things that they want Sana Shamim to say now are also obviously lies. How do we know this? Because if law enforcement had anything truthful, then they would have used that before November 20th, before mid-January 2026, the 10-year-old child claiming the 25 years later, I said anti-government things to him, before the group chat false testimony, they would have used this first, so if it had any truth to it. But law enforcement is using it now by going over and telling Sana Shamim to make these statements against me instead of law enforcement themselves making it themselves, only due to extreme envy of my brain savant getting freed and hatred against me that law enforcement holds. They're having Sana Shamim make it, even though Sana Shamim is only saying and repeating these statements that law enforcement would have themselves said as a lie, obviously, since if they had any truth, they would have said it before November 20th, before the 10-year-old child in mid-January, before the group chat false testimony. They would have said it before all their false testimonies, obviously. But Sana Shamim cannot make this statement because she has no source to tell her that this is her witness account or her source's witness account of me in any way, shape, or form. That she's either it's her witnessing me, but she no record of me even meeting her throughout my life, even though I've been watched 24/7 since I was 11. And there, except for that, there's no source that would go tell Sana Shamim that I know Hassan is a bad person because of this and this reason. That would be a credible and valid source, not someone like Sohaib, who Sohaib is obviously not valid. Sohaib used to joke around about murdering me with his BFFs when he would get rejected by these girls that were coming after me when Sohaib wanted to marry them. So Sohaib is not a valid source. Sohaib is also a criminal who committed the wedding crime with the adults in the wedding and then spent the entire wedding with those adults, moving around with them, whispering in their ears throughout the entire time. And then after the wedding, he remained BFFs with those adults, never reporting it, obviously, because he was involved himself. So these Sohaib, Asad, and Bushra Akhtar are not valid and credible sources, since they are adult criminals themselves. Who committed heinous crimes like the wedding crime we know was heinous because of seeing Kim Jong-un and President Putin's face from 2023. These were heinous crimes that these people committed that I have nothing to do with, and the law enforcement themselves confessed at the end of 2023 year. So basically, yeah. The fact of the matter is, Sana Shamim cannot claim any of these things against me, since these are not quote-unquote opinions. Opinions need witness testimony from herself about witnessing me either do something bad or in any way, shape, or form, or having a person go and tell Sana Shamim that I'm a bad person because of this or that reason, with that person being credible source and having credible info about me. But yeah, none of those things are true in this case, and Sana Shamim is basically just narrating for law enforcement due to law enforcement doing nothing but running sex schemes and money fraud till now. And you have to remember the fact that if someone is narrating for law enforcement, it has to be a lie, since law enforcement has only lied on November 20th, early January, and the group chat false testimony, mid-January, with a 10-year-old child in the group chat false testimony. So if law enforcement had any truth, they would have used it first before all the lies. But now they're getting other people like Sana Shamim to make all these statements against me, when in fact, if there was any truth to it, then then law enforcement would have used this first instead of all the lies that they've used against me. And Sana Shamim is not an opinion, quote unquote, since she has never witnessed me do anything bad her entire life, nor does she have any sources to tell her that she had that source had seen observed me do anything bad in their life, due to which this is not a quote unquote opinion, but just a narration that law enforcement wants Sana Shamim to say for law enforcement. And you have to remember the fact that if law enforcement is narrating, then law enforcement has only lied till now. They lied on November 28th. They knew it was being fabricated early November. They lied mid-January 2026 with a 10-year-old child claiming 25 years later. They lied with the group chat false testimony that their own BFF made from overseas. It wasn't even the same time period. If there was any truth to any narrations, they would have used it first. And what Sana Shamim is using is not an opinion, it's just a narration for law enforcement, due to law enforcement themselves stubbornly running sex games with Uncle Joey's in-laws right now as we speak, and money fraud that was only stopped about 2 months ago. Thank you.